Hello, everyone, and welcome to this legal compliance session that our law firm Kaizen Synergy is running. I'd like to welcome you all to today's session on how to hold a COVID-safe event. This session is being recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the session, where we will open up the phone lines and stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. Today's session is going to cover how to hold a COVID-safe event. We'll be looking at industry guidelines. We'll be looking at some of the legal compliance obligations that your agency needs to consider as part of its process. We are looking broadly at COVID-safe events when we talk about community events, group classes, client visits as well too. I will walk you also through what other agencies have done over the past few months now, and also looking forward into 2021 as well too. If you do have any questions throughout today's session, by all means, use the question and answer panel. Our support desk is online and will be supporting me during this session as well too. And I can see that we've already got some people that are actively jumping in and asking questions as we go through. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So today's agenda is going to cover a number of points. We will cover what is a COVID-safe event. We'll look at what do you need to think about, what do you need to do as well too. What are other agencies doing, especially in the not-for-profit sector where this session is specifically open to. It is very different to outside agencies, I'll say outside the not-for-profit sector, because it is based on volunteers, it is based on personnel or staff or contractors or the likes. So there is a fair broader group of people that you may need to consider when running types of group classes or COVID-safe events. There's also a difference between if you run an event or a group session for one person, 5 people, 10 people, or even 10,000 people or more. And so we're going to just look at some of the areas that your agency does need to cover as we start to now move into what's the government agencies and premiers around the country have started to refer to as COVID normal. So as we move out of lockdowns across the country, what does that look like? What happens if there is further lockdown restrictions, for example, like we are seeing in South Australia at the moment with measures being put into place just this past week? What does that look like? What is the impact around this as well too? So again, look, it is something to actually look about in terms of where we are moving towards. So I do take some of the comments around this that people are talking around COVID normal versus some other definitions, COVID cautious. Thank you, Alexander, for pointing that out as well too. And also looking at, well, how do you manage this whole process as we go through? So look, we are going to cover these off. So attending this webinar, what is some of the outcomes that we want for yourselves around this? So certainly COVID-19 will be with us for some time. So even though they are talking about a vaccine or something that's being released in early January, it's still going to be with us for some time in terms of how we operate. With it, what we do see is that with COVID normal and COVID safe events, we do see that as agencies return to work and businesses reopen, really what we need to look at is the compliance systems and policies and procedures and processes in place to actually support this. This needs to be enough to keep staff and your personnel safe, but let's be open around this. And if we're having these types of discussions and say, well, it needs to also not be onerous or confusing, because to run events, it may well be that you end up doing all of the, feeling like you're doing all of the compliance work, and the event effectively becomes so onerous and confusing that you don't end up doing or providing the service that you're actually trying to do in this process itself. Now, with it, I'm just going to respond to the group around this as well too, because a few people are having a few questions with their sound, and I am just going to post a message to say, if you are having troubles with your sound, please check the volume on your device, because certainly we can see this, and we are having a number of staff who are joining us remotely here at our law firm as well too. So I have just sent that out to everyone around that. So let's have a look. By attending this legal compliance webinar, you will get a timely set of resources that you should receive, and that includes all of these PowerPoint slides, also all of the material that we are referring to, as well as industry plans and COVID-safe plans as well. We will look at also what COVID-safe systems other agencies are currently using. We will use real-life case studies to show this. So as part of these legal webinars that we have been running throughout this year, we actually do use, with permissions, agencies, real-life case studies to actually show you how this actually works and what you can do to essentially adopt some of their practices as well. And with that, hopefully what you'll get is some learning materials out of this that you can actually start using today. This webinar, as I've mentioned, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded all the way up to the Q&A part of the session. You can ask questions throughout the webinar in the chat group as well too. We will be publishing this webinar all the way through, along with the materials on our Gemba 360 YouTube channel, and also all materials will be circulated to all attendees today. We do also have a knowledge base, so any questions that are raised as well too, even from our past webinars, are also published on our website. And of course, with that, if you do have any questions, you can come back to us as well too. You can see my mobile number listed on here, and it is also being made public as well. So on that, just a couple of reference points as well. Here's a picture of me that they put on the website as well too. It is KaizenSynergy.com, which is our law firm. And if you want to have a look at our past resources and webinars, these are all freely available to use. You can also look back under the knowledge base that we have here. And we have also made these webinars available on the YouTube channel, which you will get links and access to as well. So those are available for you as part of this whole process as well too. So with it, certainly when we look at some of the events broadly, we have defined these in largely to three different types of group events and COVID-safe events. So essentially, we're looking at COVID event or community-based events, group classes, and client visits as well, because we know certainly in the not-for-profit sector that agencies like yourselves will often provide client visits, and that might involve groups of people together. So as we go through this, when you look at the COVID-safe events, if hosting a COVID-safe event organizers should monitor the list of approved COVID-safe industry plans, like above, to determine whether your event or parts of your event is covered by one or more specific COVID-safe industry plans, and for guidance on measures be implemented in relation to the particular activity. And we'll cover what some of the industry plans look like and what you need to consider through this as well. As part of the process, the event organizers must ensure compliance with these events and include specific requirements regarding your approvals as well. We are going to look at a number of case studies of what agencies have done as well. And with that being said, a number of agencies have given us permission to share some of their learnings around this and system processes that actually adopt the legal requirements that we're going to be talking about as well. One of those is Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative, and we recognise Laurie Seville, the Chief Operating Officer there, and there are some 200 to 300 staff that work at that agency. In comparison, there's also an agency, Women's Housing Limited, and I acknowledge Judy Line as part of this process as well. Judy has given permission around it. They have provided access to some of their resources and information around this too. In comparison, they're an agency about 20 to 30 people as well, but the difference is they actually provide women's housing services, and something that we will be covering as part of this process for you too. In comparison, there's also an agency called Refugee Connect, and we thank Ken Myers out there. This is a small agency, and they provide refugee services. Ken delivered a short event, a small event a few weeks ago, and they're based in Brisbane, just by way of background, and their role is to assist refugees with their social inclusion into the Brisbane community. And certainly as part of that, what we're seeing is the similarities between what these three agencies have done in terms of how they've managed their COVID-safe events. But equally, what's come out of this is what are the slight differences in what they've had to do, but still the legal compliance obligations that they've all had to meet is identical. So for example, they've had to keep registers. Well, what does that look like for someone like Ken, who's running a very small event, versus Women's Housing that run multiple services, community-based events from a number of different sites? How does that work? Versus Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative that provide client services and the like. So you can see there's a lot of overlap in terms of sometimes what they do, but there's also a lot of differences in how they actually do it. But I will say the legal compliance obligations are quite similar across that process. Equally, what we've also drawn on for today's session is over the past few months, we've supported religious groups, museums that have delivered services and groups in terms of support to community events, religious groups in the sense of getting congregations together. Both of them often involve volunteers as well. Big breakfast groups that are now being planned for early next year, fairs and festivals that are being planned for 20, 30,000 people looking into 2021. So what we're seeing as we talk about these sessions, and I'll be drawing on some of these real life case studies as we go through, is what have they done that has actually worked in order to meet their legal compliance obligations throughout this process as well. So some of the things that you'll see as part of the industry plans, and I will just touch on this, is that you need to keep registers, whether it be an event or a workplace attendance registers, and this is what some of these look like as well. And you'll see these across the different states and territories. This is one that we've seen across Queensland and Victoria, for example, where small agencies and events have had to keep attendance registers. And again, what is the date, name, contact information, check-in, check-out, and number of people visited. Now, that's quite different to then when you start to talk about agencies, and this is an example of one here, that they suddenly have a large group that they're planning on having, or a high number of people coming through. While it might be small groups, there might be a high number of people coming through over a course of a week. So this is where you start to look at attendance registers for things like using and you might have seen QR codes on cafes and the likes around the country, where again people are checking in, but still not. They're keeping an attendance register, for example, but it's the traffic is a lot higher in terms of what is actually being required. Now, these are the sorts of things we're going to talk about in today's session of how this all works, and have a look at what you need to actually look at. So just by way of introduction, because we've got a lot of agencies joining us from around the country today, we've had some 1,000 plus people register just for today's session. In saying that, over the last few months, we've onboarded some 2,000 companies just in the past few weeks to support their COVID-safe plans. Many new agencies are joining us, so we just wanted to just give you a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. Kaizen Synergy Law Firm is a law firm that I actually set up 12 years ago. And it was in part of that was because I saw that really at the end of the day, a lot of the legal advice that was being provided could actually only be understood by lawyers. And other lawyers were needed to be brought in to understand what advice was actually being delivered. What we're actually looking at here is giving you the resources and tools that you can actually start using this afternoon once we send out the email and also after you finish this session. As part of this, we've worked with Aboriginal agencies. We've had a compliance system that's been run for the past 10 years. It's been recognised by peer-reviewed journals, published in journals like Computers and the Law some 10 years ago. It's being registered as part of this through the Dubai International Emergency and Disaster Conference some 12 years ago around it, where it was the opening session during that international webinar. Equally, as part of that, the Gemba 360 compliance system that I will show you and you will have access to today for a single seat, which will really be there to support your agency. If you wanted to roll it out to your other staff, then obviously there will be small fees attached to it, but it gives you the resources that you need to manage your COVID-safe plan. It is a mobile device, and I will show you how other agencies do use it to deal with community events and actually bring your industry plans together. That's all that I wanted to say around the who we are and what we do. As I said, you can go back. We've been running these sessions since February. We're in a really unique position because of my background while being a registered practicing lawyer. Equally, my background is in public health, where my prior background is actually in preventive medicine and epidemiology, where I majored in disease control back at Monash University before going on and doing my legal practice degree as well there. So it has become useful in terms of looking at the legal compliance obligations for agencies. And I look at this from both a legal compliance point of view, but also what's going to work from an epidemiological point of view to support your agency. So when we look at community events, and let's jump straight into some of the legal obligations that you need to think about and how this actually works for you. So when we look at the community events, a lot of agencies that we've worked with over the past number of months will start with the industry COVID-safe plan. And you can see that we've got one up in front of you. And these industry plans, and we've got these as resources, can actually be a good guiding document for you. And we'll actually send copies of these around. These do vary from state to state. This is the one that we've pulled from Queensland, and it talks about the attractions industry. It talks about the specific items that you need to look at as part of this process. It talks about what is the general guidelines and provides a bit of a step-by-step approach. However, what comes out of that is the how do you do it? How do you measure? How do you record? How do you create the tables that you actually need? And what other documents do you then need to rely on to make sure you're doing enough? And with it, the industry plans, and we see this with the other with the states around the country. From there, what they then have is that you have the plan, and then you effectively have a statement of compliance that you can then sign and date as part of this process. And this is what we have seen in Queensland as an example around this. And equally, there are other plans in New South Wales, some in Victoria, some in South Australia, Perth, etc., that cover these off. And we'll actually send these across to you, and I'll share what these look like. What we then have, though, is, and the confusing part about this, and I'll just identify the confusing elements and then unpack them for you as we go through it, is that each agency is meant to have its COVID-safe plan in place. And this was something that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, put up a number of months ago and held up his three-step framework, which has largely been adopted across each state and territory. And all agencies that are workplaces that open, as you can see, are meant to actually have a COVID-safe plan in place. And we have covered off in previous webinars the legal duties of care that directors and officers, board members and CEOs and executive managers have in relation to making sure that this is in place. We've equally seen in some states and territories, especially down in Victoria, where the state health department has actually contacted agencies and said, you're open, show me your COVID-safe plan. And they've basically had 24 hours to show it to them and produce it. So with it, I'll actually show you how you can actually do that, what tools you can actually use to run this. So when we're talking of community events, there is a bit of a process that we need to look at, irrespective of whether it's a large group event for attractions, looking at thousands of people, or whether it's a small group class. Essentially, you need to have your COVID-safe plan in place. Now, what we have done when we've looked at, and I'll just jump back to some of the slides, this one here. Most agencies, here it is here, thank you. Most agencies, we say, will start with their COVID-safe plan as part of the event and try to unpack, okay, what do we need to do? Have we ticked off these particular aspects? And I'm just listing those items from the middle of the page that we're focusing on. What is missed, though, in that is the structure of it. So when we approach this, there are some guiding principles that we need to look at. We generally will look at things like the public health and well-being laws. We look at what directives are coming from the Commonwealth government around managing your specific COVID-safe activities. And some of those have been in place for many months now. We'll also utilize, as part of the community events, we'll actually look at the safe work guidelines as well. So it's really, when you look at any industry plan or community event, what we do need to look at equally is also what are the safe work guidelines coming out of that. And I'll show you copies of what that looks like, because that actually provides some of the details that you need to consider when actually running these community events. And some of those items are consistent across any group event, but it's really how you actually apply those. Equally, what you then need to look at is, well, what is your health plan for your state? So what I mean by that is, if there are rules changing and you look at your industry plan, that's one part. What we then need to look at is, what are the current rules that are affecting your state at any point in time? And I'm going to give you some general rules to look at as part of this whole process. But when we compare what's happening, for example, in Queensland right now versus parts of South Australia in the last 2 weeks, you can see that there are anomalies that we need to address, and one plan isn't going to suit right across the board. So you've got to keep up to date with what is the pandemic response within your state as well. Now, equally, what we then overlap is the industry plan. So it's, in some ways, what I'm getting at is, if you can use the industry plans, but unless you're looking at, well, what are the current restrictions that we have in my state at the time that the event is being run, or even in the lead up to the event, then essentially your event planning will need to change based on what is currently happening in your state or territory at this time. So when I look at the legal compliance structure, how we've actually looked at this, and you can see it sort of goes from left of your screen to right, is we're pulling the legislation, we're looking at what are the guidelines coming from the Commonwealth and Safe Work Australia around things, we're looking at what the current pandemic plans are, and then from there, what we're assessing the COVID event plans is based on those particular cascade of documents. And you'll have access to all of these documents that I'm talking about now. Now, to make it simple, what we have and what we're going to provide to all attendees today, and we've done this since February, is access to the Gemba 360 COVIDSafe dashboard. It is open to your agency to access. It's full of the resources that you need around things that I'm talking about. So that way you have a single seat to be able to use this. It gives you access to all of the resources that I'm talking about. You'll see the event plans. You'll be able to document it. We know it works because agencies have been using this right across the board since February around this. Equally, agencies like Rumballara, where they had a huge hotspot that came out in the last month and they've had to screen 200 odd staff. Well, they've been running this since February. We know it works. The health department actually was actually very, very interested in how they managed to do this as well too. And so we know that it works and it can be ramped up depending on what you need it to happen as well. Now, let's look at the legal compliance requirements around this. When we look at a COVID-safe event, some of the things we need to talk about is around the work health and safety legislation. There is a duty across your agency when running these events, whether it's a large-scale community attraction, right down to a single event for a small group of people, then essentially you have your work health and safety legislation and obligation. That means you need to ensure your event is, if you're running it, is permitted under the public health and wellbeing directions, but is also COVID safe as well. And that means ensuring that you put in place specific restrictions, guidelines to manage your event from start to finish. And really that's from a work health and safety point of view as well. The Public Health and Wellbeing Act in your relevant state and territory, and we were asked as part of these questions around the changes that might occur, let's say New South Wales versus South Australia or Victoria, the likes. Well, then again, looking at that requirements, again, these will change over time and hopefully restrictions continue to relax. When we work with a religious agency, they provided congregation type services across the country. And what we leveled up was looking back, and I will go back to this document here, which is the COVIDSafe Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3. And essentially what we looked at doing was taking the industry plan and overlapping it almost 3 separate times into Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3. Because what this gave me was the guiding rules around, well, what are, for example, gatherings? If we look at column 1, what does that look like? If on Step 3, it's non-work gatherings of up to 100 people, what are the rules around that? Versus Step 1, which is non-work gatherings of up to 10. Now, there may be also some variations, but when we actually look at industry plans, what we're actually doing is leveling this out to go, well, what happens in the event I need to restrict it? And it may well be for some agencies, they've simply said to us, look, if it drops below Step 3, we're simply not running the event. However, for small group classes where there are essential services providing those to disability, people with a disability, then again, what they've done is to say, well, look, Step 1, it's non-work gatherings of up to 10. We are essential service, so we are going to provide those. So you can see as part of this, one of these, we've actually taken the 3-step framework plus the industry plans and actually overlap these together for you as well. And let me just jump back to where we were on our slides. So equally, what we've also said to people is organize your events and documents early. Now, there are some general rules that we need to look at around this. Now, the challenges caused, how we look at what are some of the rules around this, is let's look at the challenges. There are a number of challenges caused clearly by COVID-19. This means social distancing and the number of people coming together. The current social distancing restrictions imposed by the Australian government may restrict the ability to hold events. Last week we had spoken about AGMs while also complying with COVID restrictions. And when we talk about community events, there are some works, and we'll cover these off like what we did with AGMs, where there may be not only face-to-face or groups of people coming together, but there may also be hybrid events that you may also want to consider. And hybrid events may be where part of the event is run virtually online, and part of it is run as face-to-face equally as well too. So there are some similarities in these types of events and AGMs. And as I've mentioned, you might want to consider whether to hold hybrid or virtual events, group classes, or direct client supports as other options for you as well. Now, as I mentioned, what I mean by virtual events around this means using an online platform to attend, vote, and ask questions. We know that there are some agencies, even this weekend, that are running Diwali festivals around the country. And that said, there are some of them that are running completely virtual events. It's having thousands of people attend, and the event is running completely virtual. There are some now that are running hybrid events that allow clients to attend a physical venue or given the option around that, but equally they're also doing that via online platforms. So those are things that you can consider as part of this. Now, what to think about? So what we have done is summarize group events down to essentially 6 questions. And when agencies contact us, these are really the 6 questions that we go through with them. And it's a checklist that will be sent out to yourselves this afternoon around it. And it covers like this. So if we start at the state laws, does your current rules allow for events? So as a community-based not-for-profit agency, firstly, does your rulebook allow to run events like this? Equally, from the state laws, are there any current restrictions in place around running different types of group events that you might have? We do have a knowledge-based register that we have built up since February. Again, we'll circulate those around. It's free to access and the likes. But what it covers is some of the commonly asked questions that agencies have had. So where it's not clear from state governments around, let's say, congregations coming together or having social groups for people over the age of 65 plus. Those are the sorts of, I'm going to say, specific details you might want to come back to us on. But essentially looking at the state laws of what governs your current rules. The next thing that we look at is, does the venue have a COVID-safe plan, or is there an industry plan that you're relying on to use? Importantly, the COVID-safe plan and the venue, whether you're running it in a showground, for example, whether you're running an event at somebody's house, is completely different. But what also needs to look at is some of the rules around venues and workplaces. And I'll share what some of the safe work guidelines have around this. So this includes things like keeping social distancing if you can and where possible. Can you increase the ventilation throughout the venue while you're actually running that session? Do you have attendance registers as well too of who came and what time they came as well? And this then goes down to, what services am I actually running from that specific site or venue? It will be different based on whether those services are permitted. Again, whether you're running group sessions, how is that working? So you can start to see, by almost using this 6-point checklist, you're starting to unpack some of the questions that you have. We've found that some agencies will try and just jump to industry plans, jump to compliance plans, but actually using this almost 6-point checklist gives you an idea of where you're actually fitting in at the right point in time. As part of that, you then need to look at, can I maintain the rules of workplace health and safety and venue capacity? So there is still, for most places, the 4 meter square rule, or there is questions around, well, how do we actually manage social capacity. And again, we see this a lot at the moment around churches and religious groups, where they might have in the pre-COVID time, now that we're in COVID normal, they might have had 100 people attending their venue. With the current workplace and health and safety guidelines in place, keeping 1.5 meters distance and also 4 square meter rules in place reduces that from, let's say, 100 people to 20 people. And once that assessment is done, that then means, well, how do I then manage that? Is this going to be COVID safe based on those current principles that I currently have around this? Also, when looking at that, what religious groups have looked at is, well, instead of having one session, can I hold multiple sessions, still having, let's say, that 100 group coming through, but what is my process to actually maintain work health and safety, PPE equipment, sign in, sign out? What does that actually look like? And when we talk about going, looking at threes and point 3 and point 4, some of the things that we've had to work through with agencies was, yes, the venue might be able to hold this capacity, but then the flip side of it is, well, if everybody's lining up out the front, or group meeting out the front, but not maintaining social distancing, and you don't have any signs or posters out the front to ensure that people do maintain that social distancing while congregated outside, waiting to come in for a venue, well, that poses another risk on its own as well. So there are parts of this that you need to look at more carefully. And this comes back to, well, what services am I running? And this is the section that we find that people get confused really quickly, because you might have that in the industry plans that you actually have, but it's the legal compliance management of the actual COVIDSafe plan event that causes a lot of questions for people. As looking at then points 5 and 6, what are the other things do I need to consider as part of this process? I've just had a question which I will just jump into, asked from Alexander, asking, in terms of managing, what are the obligations on the organisers of forcing people in a congregation of refusing to wear a mask or maintain physical distance? Do we have to throw them out? That's a really good question, Alexander, that I will just answer now. Part of this rules is to ensure your event is COVID safe. What we have advised people to do around this is to look at, well, what is the risk that you have around this? And when you ask the question in the chat group now, and I'll just repeat it again, it says, in terms of managing, what are the obligations on the organizer of forcing people in a congregation of refusing to wear a mask or maintain social distance? Now, we have asked people to, when you walk, we need to look at the risk around this. It is a workplace health and safety requirement at this point of time for people in certain states to wear masks. So let's say in Victoria, for example, where masks are currently mandatory. It is an obligation for people that come together to wear masks. That's the current rules that we currently have in Victoria that's there. It's equally a rule from to maintain physical distancing around that. So as your event organizer, you need to make sure that equally people are kept COVID safe, and either that, and thank you, Alexander just confirmed that he is in Victoria as well. So mask wearing is mandatory in Victoria, which is why I picked that up around it. And you do have an obligation to not only to that person, but also to look at whether that person has any other complex conditions that they might have. And thank you, April, for raising this as well. So let me cover this off for you, Alexander, because it's a really good question. So from a workplace health and safety, from a COVID safe point of view, as an event organizer, you need to make sure that you meet your workplace health and safety obligations. And that means that you do what you can to protect other people within that event as well. So if people are not maintaining the current rules around it, you have the right to actually ask them to leave as well. That means that you are essentially protecting not only that person, but other people as well from your event. What we have also suggested to agencies, and I will just come to April's question and comment around this as well too, which is also valid building on this question. What we have done though, Alexander, and suggested this to agencies, is to say, well, you need to also screen people in when coming into the event to ensure that they are COVID safe. So they shouldn't be coming in the first place if they are presenting with any COVID symptoms as well. And that again is as part of your own COVID safe processes. And people that are coming in are then registered as part of this process. So that's how we would manage it initially around that. Now, April has come up with a really great comment around it and also said, I guess it could get quite complex for people claiming exemptions if they have medical reasons, etc. And that's correct. So my first point of call around this is you meet your requirements to say that, look, they need to maintain their obligations around it. And if they raise that they can't wear a mask for medical conditions, then that is a process that you would have in place in order to address that issue. But I take that's a really good point that April raised, because that is the exemption that currently applies. So that's not something that we're saying is unique, Alexander, to your specific event. It's a rule that currently applies across Victoria, where people don't have to wear masks for certain reasons around that. But the vast majority of people are compliant with wearing masks in this case as well too. Then again, yes, Emily, you're correct as well too in saying, would you? There would be some clause. I agree to abide by mask wearing and physical distancing at the event and stay home if I am sick. That's absolutely correct, and that's what we've actually suggested to agencies when they are actually looking at the what I'll call the downstream event management, is looking at the event plan and community plan, but also making it quite clear from the start what the expectations are of people when attending the event as well. And that's exactly correct from what we are seeing across the board. With it also around this, it's management of that plan to ensure that people are kept safe. In terms of the complexity around it, yes, there are exemptions to medical issues and reports around it. I absolutely agree with that. But this is essentially the consistent rules across the board in terms of what you are looking at. The other parts that we're also mentioned as point 6 is the register of attendees and COVID-safe checks for attendees. So what we are suggesting, and this is what Colleen has also just mentioned in the chat group as well too, and also Claire as well. That's a great question, Claire, asking around QR codes, and that's exactly what other agencies have done. I will come to that in this session shortly as well, and I'm just conscious of time to make sure that we get through it. So the part is around register of attendees and COVID-safe checks for attendees. So what we want to do is, prior to people coming into your event or prior to you going to an event, whether it's a large-scale attraction, having tens of thousands of people, whether it's a congregation, whether it's your agency staff are visiting groups of peoples as well too, what we're looking at is effectively a register of attendees and COVID-safe checks for attendees. So what we want to have is essentially a check to make sure that people aren't presenting with any COVID symptoms. And after that, you then have a register of attendees as well. Now, with the safe work guidelines that I've mentioned, you may have seen these around, and they talk about the physical distancing. And this is where you can start to unpack the relevant industry plans from what we see. And we'll send these around to you. I won't go into much detail around this, but only to reference this as part of the event planning. And equally, there's also the health, hygiene, and facilities checklist. And we've had agencies actually start to continue to use these, not start to use these, started to use these when these were first released, and as the part of their periodic reviews, maintain these throughout the session. And we've got these for the cleaning of the cleaning, we've got these for the health and hygiene, and also the physical distancing. So these cover off the guideline documents that your plans should also consist of. Now, what does an event and workplace attendance register actually look like? Well, as part of that, this is a really simple one that we've seen. This is one that was adopted from Victoria, and I'll show you what some others look like as well. What this looks like is it has the date, the first name, phone number, check-in, check-out, relationship with your agency, and areas visited. This was one that we actually worked with an agency called Creations Ministries International, which was a register for their programs and their volunteers who had people come to their houses to actually run these types of events. They would do the COVID screenings, and you would have these event registers. Now, picking up what Claire also pointed out in the comments section as well too, Claire mentioned that we have QR codes in place. We take temperatures and ask people if they have any symptoms. Do we also have to have people a signed statement to say they don't have symptoms around that? No, you don't, Claire, around that. It's not something that we've suggested to agencies to do. Picking up your point, this is what women's housing actually does as well. And with it, let me show you how this actually works. So for those that don't know how QR codes actually work, what I will show you is essentially it is an events register around what people have. And what you can do is essentially, and you'll see what I have listed here, and I'll just share this screen across. So welcome everybody. This is my real life mobile phone. And I can now see, you can all see that I've had 123 missed calls since this morning. So let me show you how this works. Essentially, what Claire was talking about is this. So this is live, and it's taken a photo from the process. And this is Women's Housing Limited, and it's their main site address. So what we have here, and this is what Claire was talking about, it is a QR code that they have. They can link it in, and I'll actually say, okay, they've got something similar to this, and I'll show you how this works. You've got your name, and I'll just put in my name around this. Everyone in Google knows my mobile phone number, so we'll use this. So what we have done with agencies is, and we've listed the symptoms that you can see here. And this is how this works in real life. It is live. So I'm showing you something, how this works of what we have. So I've got my symptoms that we've done, and from an epidemiological point of view, this is what is being measured in Victoria, but it is also consistent across the board coming out of Cabinet as well. So do you have any of the following symptoms? And this has some 10 different items. In this case, I'm going to click no. I'm going to say reason for visiting property. I'm going to say group meeting, and I'll just put in test here. Any comments? No. Now I simply submit that around that, and here we have here. Now what we have done from here, and that's all that needs to be done as part of that process. And you can see from here that it's simply linked across, and that's what the register has been doing. And so when Claire talks about having a QR code, that's quite simple around this process. Equally, for large groups, we've found that this works, and what we have done is Ken has also linked this to his Gemba 360 COVIDSafe dashboard. So all of this information, even though it's running through forms, can actually be consolidated into an event register. Whether you're joining the dots for your COVIDSafe event, whether it's a smaller event or whether it's a larger event, what we then need to look at is how you can actually join these dots together for yourselves. The workplace attendance register is one of the important parts apart from the industry plan, because essentially what you need to be able to do is track it. Now, what has been raised though is when you start to look at the legal compliance obligations around this, what then happens is you need a pen to fill this out. Once you have a pen and people start using the pens that you have, You then need to have PPE equipment to clean the pen and also make sure that you aren't cross-contaminating between the paper and the pen itself. It works if you're let's say a small cafe, but all of a sudden, when you're actually then linking this to a large number of people, or you're going out to certain sites multiple times, it's a high traffic area, that's where we're starting to say, well, you need to essentially look at the next step up of what Rumballara, Aboriginal Corporate and also Women's Housing have done. In this case, what we have seen is bringing together things like the disaster plans, looking at the policies, procedures, pandemic forms, and it can get quite confusing very, very quickly. What we have done is bring all this together for you as well. So this is a resource that is open for you to use. Equally, you can start linking your data sets together and your plans together as well. Now, what this looks like is the same whether you jump from an agency the size of Rumballara with 200 to 300 staff to Women's Housing Limited with about 30 odd staff. They actually use QR codes around this for their specific events that they run, and all of this links back into their Gemba 360 COVIDSafe resource. Now, when I jump in to show you how to do that, and you all will have access to this as well too this afternoon if you don't already, essentially you can click on this login button. It will take you to this blue button screen here. Your login details will obviously be your email address, and your password will be sent as well. And essentially what you can have access to is your COVID-safe plans around what we sit in here. What we have done for all of you is bring the COVID-safe plans, step 1, step 2, step 3, you can see that here. And what we've also done is look at all of the industry plans based on what I've shown you. This is a resource that's open to you. You have the events for a client site visit, a checklist for the client site visit. You have the checklist for the community event, and you also have the one for the group class. The client site visit might be 1 or 2 people, which we consider a group event. The group class might be 5 or more people. And then the community event is for the attractions industry as well. So you have this access to actually view this information as well. You can log in, click on it, and you've got your checklists that you can then work through and see. Agencies have then asked us for, well, can we have a look at our policy documents to support this process? You can simply go into the Gemba Docs section and type in policy, and you've got these resources that are there around this as well. And here's a sample of those, and you can simply click on that and have a look at those as well. Equally from an events point of view, equally from events point of view, what you then have is your HR area as well. And from here, once you access that, you can then also run your registrations for your employees, but most importantly, for those of you that have volunteers, you can run your volunteers and events registers, and all of the QR information, the registration details that are being listed, essentially pour back into this dashboard for you. And you have access right across to the whole mainstream data sets. It also means that if you need to, as Claire points out as well too, run and keep a register of people of their assessment forms that have been done directly from the mobile, well, you can see that you've got that information here, and this is exactly the same questions that I answered before, and it's also time and date stamped for you. So it's certainly there for you to use. I just noticed that Ella has posted up a question to say, I haven't seen my COVID Gemba 360 COVIDSafe login details as yet. You'll certainly get that after today's session, Ella, as well too. If you don't, you can reach out to us on the mobile as well too, or give our office a call. With it, all of your resources that you need, we've seen is here around it. It is there as a full resource for your agency to use, and you get access around this. And we've literally onboarded thousands of agencies this year to support them throughout this process. The good thing about this whole industry's plans, it's well and good to run these as part of this. What we do find though is that when you have your plans that you need to work through, and I'll just do it clicking on the disaster section, what agencies have then said to us is, gosh, the department have called us and asked us to show them our COVIDSafe plan. How can we do this? Well, quite simply, if I had this opened, which I'll do here now, I can simply print out a report by clicking on the PDF document. And I'm doing this live for you so you can actually see how this actually works and how quickly it actually appears. And here it is here. There it is, and I can actually save that directly to my computer and actually send that off to the department or council around my COVIDSafe plan. The good thing about this is that as the law changes in your state and territory, we will update you about these changes that affect your agency around it. And it is something that covers off all of your COVIDSafe requirements. We have seen this work for agencies, so it's not something that we're saying, hey, give this a go, have a look at it. We're actually saying it actually works. We've seen it work for agencies like Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative, who've been involved in a hotspot where all of a sudden, 24 hours notice, one person has traveled literally 100 kilometers from Metro Melbourne to regional Victoria where they are, and the whole suburb, literally whole suburb and surrounding suburbs, the department moved in and classified the area as a hotspot, and they were able to manage their process. Women's Housing Limited has rolled this out to all their sites, so that way their QR codes and events that they manage will now have this. So any contractors coming in, any visitors that they have are all managed through it. So we can see that this works in real life situations, and it just makes life simpler and takes all the guessing work out for your agency. With that, our recommendations are really simple, and I'm just cautious of time. I want to keep this to under an hour and then open up for questions and answers. Have a look at our policy documents and materials that we circulate today. Have a look at creating the tasks and measure against your COVIDSafe plans. What we suggest is identify the workflows required as part of your legal compliance obligations. Industry plans are great in times of what you need. However, the plans that you have is just one part of it. What you need to be conscious of is how do you actually implement that plan? What is going to work? Take in mind the example that I used for congregations. The venue might be great. You might be able to meet the requirements for social distancing and the likes. But if everybody meets out the front before the event starts and there isn't any social distancing, well, that's a risk in itself as well too. So you need to look at that whole process and look at those particular items. I'll be sending out these webinar slides today as well too, and have a look at that 6-point checklist that I covered off. That's in fact what our lawyers use when we go through this process and discuss it as a starting point for agencies. You can use your Gemba 360 COVIDSafe dashboard to manage your events, exactly what I've just shown you today, and we've done it in real life time as well too. If you have any questions, by all means contact us. These are my contact numbers that are listed here as well too. My mobile number is listed on Google, as you can see. We are making that public as well, and we do get back to everybody on the day as well. If you have any questions, I can see there's quite a few coming through the question and answer panel as well. We will discuss those now. If you are watching this webinar as a recording on our knowledge base or even on the YouTube channel in the future, by all means, please contact us. If you do have any questions or need access to your Gemba 360 dashboard, you can reach us back on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com.